So welcome back to Software Without Borders. Today, I'm joined by my co-host, Olivier Poulard, who leads global software engineering strategies at Accelerance. So instead of having in this case, Olivier, you are the guest because over the last year and 2 years, you've seen a lot and you've experienced a lot with both clients and offshore partners. And you've been a part of a lot of evolutionary transitions, with regards to AI and agentic and also innovation and various other aspects of the client's journeys. And the goal of this conversation is to glean some of your insights and what you've been seeing and where you think the global software engine is heading. So what we really want to do today is focus on what you've seen as you've stood up our consulting arm, moving beyond just finding a partner into actually diagnosing the software development lifecycle issues, designing target operating models and making that change stick in our new reality as it is today. And the fact is that, Olivier, what I've always appreciated about you is that you've been on both sides of the global delivery coin. I mean, both as a client running distributed teams, large-scale distributed teams up to 1,000 engineers and so many teams, and also you also been on the strategic side for a nearshore offshore software delivery system and partner. So today we're going to be looking at the most common software development lifecycle pitfalls we see and the surprising hidden costs that leaders often overlook and the practical playbooks that create actual predictable high quality delivery. So with that long introduction, welcome, Olivier.
Thank you. Hi.
So, I guess where I'd like to start off is just, let's take a step back. Let's take a short journey through the evolution and the creation of Accelerance's consulting arm after, decades of running global engineering, and primarily our business model was sort of connecting great aligned software development partners around the world with clients. Why did this need to take place, and how did you approach this?
For a very, very simple reason. I've seen the same pattern repeat over and over and over. So, the general instinct, I would say, is to add more people when you're in trouble. When in fact, adding more people will just adds complexity and more issues, quite frankly. So the real problem is not necessarily that you need more people, but you need maybe more efficiency or more even effectiveness, if you will. So instead of looking at it from only that one very obvious dimension, the people, we need to look at it not only from a people perspective, but also from a process, technology, and data, and make sure that all four are aligned and managed in a coherent operating model, if you will. The problem is it's very simple. You cannot scale chaos. So until you actually solve that problem, adding people will just add fuel to the fire.
That's a really good point, and I want you to help me, maybe even justify the direction that Accelerance was pre-Olivier and then post-Olivier, because I'm sensitive and I don't want you to completely delegitimize our previous software development model. But honestly, in our previous model where we have this certified network of software development partners around the world, and they are chosen and they vetted and visited and validated for their ability to not only provide the talent and to provide the right technology stack and hyper specialization around developing software, but also to theoretically guide clients to build a more cohesive, efficient, globalized software development arm. Now, maybe we were assuming too much and giving too much responsibility to those partners to be able to accomplish that. Maybe we were assuming or hoping that the clients would bring more process, more data, more technology and measurement to the table than they actually could. But help me rationalize exactly in the evolution and the transition of talent and chaos does not equal the outcomes that clients are ultimately looking for.
Well, what I've come to realize is that when you've seen one client, you've seen one client. When you've seen one partner, you've seen one partner. And they can often work very, very well together, but it doesn't mean that they're completely aligned. And that's the problem. Uh, one side will make some assumptions, the other one will make other assumptions. And in the end, until they actually agree on what it is that needs to be produced, working software in this case, and how we want that to happen, the ways of working, if you will, because it takes two to tango in the end. So you have two parties, they need to tango. They can't tango unless they actually know the music together, actually, and they have actually practiced together, if you will. So if they cannot work in alignment, then it's going to be extremely, extremely difficult to be one effective, or even if they are effective, which is often the case, being efficient. I've seen the case where, you know, companies, talk about estimation, and in the end, that we'll talk about estimation, I'm sure, at some point in this podcast. But estimation will be as good as the common understanding of the product to come, obviously.
Let me circle back around to this. So, I mean, there's talent, there's the right talent. Good talent hopefully is better than bad talent, obviously. There's the client needs, and then there's the client goals. And there historically is typically a lot of assumptions going on that if you have the right aligned partner with hypothetically great processes and great aligned talent, that they can address the needs and help the customer accomplish the goals that they're looking for. But that's probably really putting a lot of or too much emphasis on the assumptions that are being made about that just all coming into peace, coming into place, and magically happening. Like, it looks great on paper, sort of thing, I always say. But then there's the execution part. So can you help me, like, regardless of whether the talent of the partner is good or bad or aligned or otherwise? Obviously, if it's bad, then you're just exacerbating things, right? But okay, what are the necessary things before people start making wrong assumptions and going into something with a lot of hope and expectation, and then achieving less than hoped for goals? What needs, if even if you have a great partner with a great track record and great references and great talent and even great processes, that doesn't mean that that's all going to translate into the operating system, right? What needs to happen, even with all of those things? Otherwise, bad things can happen.
Okay, so several things need to happen. Is one is both parties need to align on the requirements. That's one thing. Garbage in, garbage out. So unless the partner is clearly aligned with the client's requirements, and it's not just the requirements, the vision, especially the vision, quite frankly, and the objectives for that vision. So, because you can't really understand product requirements or any kind of requirements if you do not have a good sense of the vision, if you don't have a good sense of the objectives, especially from a business standpoint and potentially from an operational standpoint. So, first thing first is to really understand what it is that and why we want to do. The second thing is to agree on how we're going to achieve this. And it's not just one side deciding, because again, it takes two to tango in this case. The requirements are definitely the responsibility of the client, the vision, the requirements, the what, essentially, the what we want to do. But the ways of working, how things should be, what should be done, and how it should be done to achieve those requirements and those objectives should be, I think, done in a close collaboration between the two parties, if you will. Because again, it takes two to tango. So if you impose your ways of working on one side, it doesn't mean that it will be done anyway. So
Yeah.
and quite frankly, you achieve more efficiency if you tend to empower the teams who are going to implement your requirements anyway. Not to say that empowerment doesn't mean they do it the way they want, always the way they want, because then it could be chaotic, obviously, but it
Sure.
has to be done in a certain way that, okay, we're hiring those partners because they have a certain specialty, they have a certain expertise, they have a certain capacity that we don't have, or capability that we don't have, clients. We might as well trust that they will deliver. Otherwise, we don't need to contract with them.
I'm going to go back to my initial point about you in describing you is how has your experience both as a client working with partners and scaling up massive teams around the globe, but also as a partner leader, how has that sort of enlightened you or changed your approach to sort of integration and governance?
I'm going to go back to that. It takes two to tango. It's all
Yeah,
about collaboration. And I said earlier, in fact, when you've seen
yeah,
one client, you've seen one client. When you've seen one partner, you've seen one partner. I will go to the extreme of saying when you've seen one client partner relationship, you actually seen one only.
sure.
So all those client partner relationships are extremely unique, and they all have common bonds. Obviously, that's pretty obvious, but often they have very very unique characteristics, and even at the project level. So if I look at in the past when I offshored so many projects, small to big,
Yeah.
size is a factor, for instance, but the nature of the project is another factor. For instance, is it a brand new product, or is it a new product that comes from a legacy transformation, for instance, legacy modernization? You The ways of working, if you will, the various things that you're going to do together as a client partner relationship is not going to be the same, obviously, depending on the type of project. So that has to be taken into consideration. Essentially, the context is quite important, and without understanding the context, you can't really define an optimum or optimized way of working, if you will. You cannot really define the artifacts that will be needed for the client to convey their requirements and for the partner to complete the solution and provide a full solution into production.
This is actually a great transition. So let's get into a little bit more details around the software development lifecycle pain and what you see most often. So, for example, when you're assessing a client's desire to scale and develop, especially globally and specifically maybe with a software development partner, what are sort of the five bottlenecks that you see show up over and over again that must be addressed, must be identified, must be defined, must be mitigated?
I will start with the first one: ambiguous. Well, and again, I'm being nice here. Ambiguous requirements.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. I mean,
I
again, garbage in, garbage out. That's the
Sure.
typical bottleneck. Clients will assume that partners, whomever, will understand their domain as much as they do, and even if they don't, just a simple explanation will be sufficient, or loosely defined requirements in a document, for instance. So that's one thing.
Well, that's a bottleneck. And is there what's the short take on the solution?
Make sure that you have all your requirements complete. It doesn't mean highly detailed, but you should have a checklist of requirements. For instance, requirements are different types, for instance. So you have product requirements. That's a pretty obvious one. But even within the product requirements, what are we talking about when we're talking about product requirements? We have the client's perspective, we have the business perspective, obviously. And then very often there's a third one that people forget, which is the operational perspective. And all three will have a huge impact on what I would call external functionality and internal capability of that product. The architecture, for instance, or system architecture and software architecture will be very, very different based on operational requirements, for instance, or even based on business requirements. Another type of requirements, so we're not just talking about product requirements here, but another type that is extremely important that will have a huge impact on your data persistence, the storage and processing of that data, the way the data is going to be migrated from an old system to the new system, if you're talking about a legacy transformation. Those requirements are called transition requirements. I have yet to see many, many cases with transition requirements. Those transition requirements essentially say, here's what we have today, and here's what we want to have in the future, not how things are going to be designed, but what it is that we expect from the old system to the new system, for instance.
Not just the what do we want, future state, but like how do we get there from where we are?
That's right. Yeah, from
Yeah.
the as is, if you will, to the to be, to
Yeah.
be state. If that is not, and it's always an afterthought, that I've seen this so many times. We get to the end of the project, and then someone thinks, oh, by the way, we have all this data residing in the legacy system. What are we doing with all this stuff? Well, in some cases, we're just lucky because we don't need anything. But in many cases, you want to keep that data you know, for your clients to benefit from the data that they had in the past, and they may want to continue having.
Hmm.
So ambiguous requirements. That's the first thing.
And,
Ambiguous
and
requirements.
also not just requirements, but transition requirements as a
Well, I mean,
subheading.
requirements, yeah, at large, So if we're talking about requirements, there are four types really. There's product requirements, transition requirements, information requirements, especially important with if you want to implement some kind of AI capability in your system, information requirements, and then of course system requirements.
Yeah.
Right. So if you think about those requirements, they are in four different stages, and the bottom is essentially enables the one on top, which enables the one on top, which enables the one on top. And they are all very important. And the reason they're important is because they should lead to consistent estimation. And that's another one of those bottlenecks, is that we tend to guesstimate. And why do we tend to guesstimate is because we have a very loose understanding of what it is that needs to be produced as working software, and also what the real solution is. So as a product manager, I want to know personally, I don't need all the details, but I want to know what I'm getting into. I want to know what that solution is about. I want to know what that solution is going to cost me now to produce. I want to know what that solution is going to cost me post production. That's the operational piece of it. And too often, the engineers have a loose understanding of the requirements, what the product should be about. And the product management don't seem to be too concerned about the solution as long as we promise something that will get on time. And that to me is a big mistake. I think that both product managers and engineers need to work extremely, extremely closely together. One, to clearly understand what the requirements are, and two, to clearly understand what they're getting into, the product managers, what they're getting into and what they're getting in eventually. So that to me, those requirements are important. And they're important for multiple reasons, as I said, is to get the right solution, but also to get estimates, if you will, that you can rely on, that will help with being a little bit more predictable and maybe more credible on the market as well.
Please summarize this for me. So, what is the greatest impact or the greatest bottleneck in creating the best possible estimation?
Predictability, and that's quite important to the business, because that's how they are going to build their business case, if you will, and come up with a schedule of revenue essentially, and determine when the break-even point is going to be based on revenue, cost, and therefore profit margin and the profit margin associated with it. If you're late delivering your solution, it's not just additional cost, because typically being late means additional people or some amount of people, but for a longer period of time. That's what being late means to me. Okay, so you have to add people. We talked about this earlier. Not necessarily the best solution, or you have to add time. Adding people cost means that your profit margin is going to be reduced, and therefore your business case is not going to be as good. Second is, if you decide to extend the project duration, that means that your revenue stream will start later, and therefore your business case will be again different and maybe not as good. And in fact, there are some cases where, because of the new duration, had I known this from the beginning, I would have probably not allowed the project to start in the first place. So that's what estimation means, is that you have the estimations that you cannot rely on, means that you cannot trust your project plan. You cannot trust the cost prior to bringing the software or the solution into production.
So you've mentioned a set of requirements and also uh, lack of estimation quality. Anything else that is heavily weighted and impactful to predictability?
Another one is on the technical solution, I would say, and I'm not talking about architecture and that kind of stuff, but more about the definition of done. So I've seen this a good number of times. Engineers claim to be done with something, to realize as we deliver the software or post production that actually it was not done, because there was no real definition of done, or we had a weak definition of done. So definition of done is extremely important, again, to get both products and engineers aligned, and then more than those, in fact, the operational group as well, to be aligned on what to expect out of the solution. So, because in the end, until you're done, your cost.
Do you have a feel for sort of a minimum set of artifacts to stabilize a team once you do this assessment? Let's say in the first 30 to 60 days. What would be the 30 to 60-day game plan as far as setting up to make sure that these bottlenecks are addressed and resolved?
I would ensure that the minimum templates are in place, because it's not when you write requirements, it's not when you put an architecture document together that you have to discover the type of template or the type of information that you need to provide.
Mm-hmm.
I would provide and I've done this, a template, but in the form of a checklist, just to simplify everything.
Sure.
It's a lot better, because a template is always seen as, oh, I must provide this information. I always must do this. Oh, that's too much work. I'm not going to do it because it's way too much work. If you present a template as a checklist, it will force people to start thinking, oh, I will need to do this, but I don't have to do it now. I just need to think about it. Because without that item, I'm not going to be done.
Sure.
So it goes back to that definition of done again,
Yeah.
is that checklist is going to help with that definition of done, and to
Hmm.
ensure that by the time that you deliver the full value into production, that checklist is complete, essentially. So I would start with this, and there are checklists for requirements, checklists for the technical solution, checklists for programmers. When can they claim to be done, for instance? What it is that needs to happen during the detailed design, coding, unit testing, integration phase, if you will, and then when they hand that over to be deployed onto the various environments, what are the various checks, if you will, that needs to be performed to ensure that the software is actually of the quality that is expected, but also secure.
Recently, we published an ebook about the true costs of software development, of which you were a great contributor to that. And there's a lot of chapters in there, 16 different sort of areas that combine various common aspects of sort of hidden costs of software development, but not just hidden costs, but hidden opportunities also. There's always a flip side of that, right? And I'd like to know from you sort of what are what are one or two of the top hidden costs or inefficiencies that leaders, if they sat down, they probably knew would exist, but they tend to either underestimate or ignore that true cost or that true opportunity, the true opportunity cost. Can you give us a couple of examples?
Context switching, for instance, would be something that I would be very cautious about.
Define that.
So, context switching is when you switch from one project to another, or within even the project, you switch from, let's say, implementing one requirement to another without really
Mm.
finishing the first one.
Mm.
So, you're constantly changing what you're doing. It takes time just to switch from what you're doing to something else and back to what you were doing.
Mm-mm. Sure.
All right. So a good example is too many meetings, for instance, is very distracting.
Yeah.
So distraction is part of that context switching, if you will. But again, as I said earlier, switching from one set of activities to another one because we have a higher priority now, and then going back into what we were supposed to do to deliver for a given sprint is very, very distracting, and therefore the productivity is going to go down. There's no
Sure.
such thing as parallel tasking, if you will. So that's the maybe one of the main ones. Going back to what I was saying earlier, poorly defined, loosely defined, if you will, or evolving requirements. That has a huge impact on cost. Obviously, you're doing something, and all of a sudden, someone tells you that, oh, there's a change request, and it means that 30%, 50% of your work is going to trash essentially. So that will be adding to the cost of the project.
I mean, that has a huge impact on contingency planning, on speed to market, on getting market feedback. So it's not just the added cost and layers of cost, but also the opportunity cost that is missed,
That's
right?
right. And then a change. So I'm all for changes, but they have to be um, um, controlled, I would say, and justified.
Yeah.
What seems to be a good idea, maybe sometimes it might not be a good idea. I've seen cases where, oh well, it will take a programmer maybe 4 hours to implement this change.
Mm,
Yes, it took the programmer 4 hours and the QA team 100 hours to test. And not only this, but this change was it's very easy to implement, but quite fundamental to the software. It took only 4 hours because maybe the engineer did not consider security concerns or performance concerns, etc. And then all of a sudden now you have that change, which is in production, that took a lot more than just 4 hours if you take into account all the testing and everything that needed to be done. And then
yeah.
all of a sudden you realize that there's a security flaw, or you realize that the performance, not of that new feature, but of something else is impacted, for instance. Changes, have should be done. That's on the contrary. I think we need to adapt to the market. We need to adapt to clients' needs, etc. We need to differentiate the client's wants from the client's needs as well. So too often we react very, very quickly to the wants as opposed and not determine if it's a real need. Something to consider.
It would be a beautiful world if we had everything defined and structured before development begins, but that's usually or often not the case. So I kind of want to talk about sequencing change without slowing delivery, meaning that if teams are actually underwater, how do you design a turnaround that will raise and establish a new baseline of predictability without necessarily stalling the existing processes and without stalling delivery?
So yeah, I've been in that situation multiple times, and it again it depends on the size of your team.
Sure.
If you have a very, very small team, the way okay, they're drowning. So let's use this
Yeah.
analogy. They're drowning because they have they're in water and they have way too much weight on their belt.
Mhm.
So the first thing first is to remove some of that weight so that they can come back up to the surface and float.
Nice
What
analogy.
does it mean in terms of software? Very simply, remove some scope,
Mm.
relief the bring some relief onto the team by removing scope. Don't add more scope. That's I was talking about changes earlier. That kind of change can have a good impact.
Yeah.
Removing some of the scope,
Mm.
relieving the team from that pressure, if you will. So they're gonna come back to the surface. As they are doing so, observe how they work. Observe the bottlenecks, basically what stops them, what hinder them, and then try to determine what would enable that team. That's really what you're doing during that phase where you've reduced the scope now. You can see really how they're working and determine, how you can get more and more accurate in the forecast. Because that's another thing we were talking about estimation earlier, where the estimation is not just at the project level, but also at the team level, and see what that team is capable of.
Is there some sort of selection process as to what scope to remove, what weight to remove, but so that you keep the team shipping while you also reduce the risk and chaos?
Yes, so the product owner or product manager, depending on the case, will have to make those decisions. But my take on this is that at first, try to reduce your scope by 20% just to see if that's going to help the team, and then reduce a little bit more if you need to, or increase back to 85, 90% as you see it. But the key is the first thing first is not to necessarily decrease too much of the scope or increase the scope too quickly. It's really to observe how the team works and determine what the bottlenecks, what the hurdles are in front of them, and what it is that we should have in place to enable that team. That's really what this is about.
Is there any sort of leading indicators, typical leading indicators that you're trying to measure that would prove that this reduction in scope and this alleviation of weight is actually working?
Well, you can look at how many hours a day they work. That's one thing. You can look at defect leakage. Very often, when people are stressed, they make mistakes. Even the QA team, quite frankly, might not see certain defects, and then those defects leak into production. So you may want to look at the ratio of defects found post production, if you will, versus pre production. That's a good indication. If the team is actually rushing and is behind, if you will, not in control of the deployment process, for instance, that is a good indication that something is completely wrong. For instance, look at the interaction of the team as well. If there's a blame game going on, then that means that there's a lot of stress and something is not completely right.
Let's transition this back to uh, outsourcing, offshoring, nearshoring, whatever that might be. And um, the again, I get back to the very beginning of our conversation that you have a team or maybe a partner, and you have a client or a co-located, home function, software function. What separates a great partner and a great partner engagement from necessarily a painful one?
So there are several points in this case. I would say the first one is being proactive versus reactive. Too often, offshore partners have a reactive behavior as opposed to being proactive on issues, for instance. They assume that there will be maybe a magic wand that will appear and fix their problems, or despite what they're doing. So I when I have a partner, I like the partner to be proactive, to tell me that maybe I'm doing something wrong, to tell me that something is not well defined, to tell me that something is potentially wrong within their own organization, by the way, that would slow down my project, for instance. If there are any kind of architectural issues that they could highlight proactively as opposed to reactively, then that would be a huge gain in productivity as far as I'm concerned.
Does it fall on the partner to make sure that obviously it's important to make sure that the right talent is in place, the right people are in place, but where does it fall other than you if you're consulting to the ecosystem that the processes, technology, and data are in place and some of these pitfalls are defined, measured, and addressed accordingly? Is it fall on the partner?
So it's both. It takes two to tango, and I think that if the partner doesn't say anything about the process, about the artifacts provided, about the metrics or the way things are measured, it's on them. They should be proactive. They should have the maturity and the experience to actually because their credibility comes from that as well. But if they do have the experience and maturity that they always claim, they always claim to have the experience that I need, the maturity from a process, from a domain standpoint, so to achieve my goals, then they should be able to. They should not be afraid of telling me that something is something is very risky. And that's another thing is risk management is seen as a PMO type of activity when in fact risk should be managed from day one by everybody and more collaboratively, I would say.
Is a lot of that thinking and these opinions come from your time having been inside of the partner and seeing sort of relationships that either your own company was not delivering or
So that's an interesting question because my ways of working with partners as a client is probably very, very different from the majority of people. I worked with a partner. I consider the partner as being my team. So I will go there on site quite often, working directly, hands on. Even though I'm the executive, it doesn't matter. Forget about my position as an exec. I will sit with the team to define everything that needs to be defined so that we can work together collaboratively and very efficiently together. So on that note, I can tell very, very quickly that the behavior is reactive versus proactive. And I will tell them that and allow them to be forthcoming and therefore more proactive with me. But it's a trust issue in the end. So they have to trust that they can come to me with issues and risk that they would not otherwise. And that's why they have this reactive mode is or behavior, if you will, is probably because initially they don't necessarily know the client. They don't necessarily trust that the client will allow such ways of working, for instance.
is there a time and a place where a model like build, operate, and transfer in which the clients make it known that over a period of time the offshore team will become integrated and embedded and wholly managed and owned by the client? Is there either signaling or an intention or a scenario of which that helps to bridge this chasm between either a proactive or not proactive partner and a client, and their ability to create sort of an integrated high efficiency function?
Yeah, I think it all depends on the client in this case because if the partner has some doubts about how much they can tell to the client without losing the business, that will drive their behavior.
I mean, does that often take place? I mean, where the partners and maybe some of it is cultural, they are seen strictly in a order taking mode, and they're getting paid to take orders and deliver on those orders, and not necessarily push back or lead or say, wait a second, stop, let's go slow to go fast, and afraid of how that might look, or whether that would jeopardize their relationship in some way.
That's correct. But conversely, I would say pushing back too much sometimes is not necessarily a good thing either.
Yeah.
Again, it takes two to tango. So accepting everything or pushing back everything is not the right way of working.
Yeah.
So has to be a good
I
balance
mean,
between the two. It
yeah.
depends again on your experience. It depends on the maturity of your team, and
Also the
the trust that you
personalities, and
have.
also the level of trust you've built up over
The trust,
time,
yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah. The trust is the key here. So, and for
Yeah.
trust to happen, I think that you need to be extremely close. I mean, it's having so another issue. Of course, we always talk about culture. Of course, culture. If we don't understand each other, it's going to be extremely difficult to trust each other. It's going to be very difficult to work effectively together. But one thing that I would like to always mention is the proximity, not in distance but in time.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
the time zone difference makes a huge difference again in the way people work together, interact, um, um, and produce software, obviously.
What's your thinking around, and not just proximity in distance or proximity in time, but also proximity and that level of trust through various different stakeholders and constituents? Like, you have business stakeholders, you have process stakeholders, um, you have I don't know, maybe thought leadership stakeholders, but uh, getting that trust built up, getting those relationships sticky, spending quality time together, and getting to a point of not only trust, but I guess mutual servant leadership. It is I have to think that the more time that is spent with that, the more commitment and ability to push back respectfully, and to be in things together as opposed to diametrically opposed, would be a real big secret to success.
That's right. I would summarize it as leadership engagement. So the leadership engagement is one of those best practices as far as I'm concerned. And leadership engagement does not mean micromanagement. It means macro management. It means empowering the team. Your partner needs to be empowered or feel empowered to provide solutions, for instance, or to feel empowered to push back sometimes. But for that to be effective, the partner needs to clearly understand the vision, needs to understand the objectives. Until that vision, those objectives, the set of principles that we should agree in the first place, and the strategy, until all that is defined by leadership and clearly understood by the partner, quite frankly, empowerment is not going to happen. Proactive behavior is not going to happen. Ownership, the fact that the partner should feel that they own something is not going to happen.
I want to start transitioning to a close with a segment that is actionable, for anyone listening here, like a CTO, for example, who's listening to this podcast right now. What what are three quick checks to run in a week as a self-assessment? And what is the one move to make next? Like, how could someone listening to this take this conversation and say, okay, this is where I'm going to start. These are the first three things I'm going to do.
Obviously, it depends on the context.
Yes.
Um, you know, I would, as a CTO, it's all about technology. So I would look at the code based vitals, if you will, or the code based vital signs, if you will. See, if there's a high churn, if there are a high level of defect leakage out of
Hmm.
the software engineering team into uh, people we're going to test, and of course post production or in production. Sorry. So
Got it.
that's the one thing I would look at. As a
Mm,
CTO, what I would look at also is the environments that we have where the software is going to be created, where the software is going to be integrated and then tested from various perspectives, functionally, non-functionally, etc., but also deployed into production. And if there's a high variability between from the development environment all the way to the production environment, then that could be a big problem, because that means that the scripts that are valid in one environment are not going to be valid in a different one. And by the way, the tests that we're going to run in one environment may not be valid in a different environment. So you have the feeling that, oh, we've done all that great job, quality assurance, quality engineering, quality control. But in the end, we realize that while we're in production now, we discover a lot of defects, a lot of bugs that were not known uh, before being in production. And the reason is very simple, is because the environments are so different that one environment is going to create issues that another one would not create otherwise. And then, okay, you were talking about three, I think.
yeah.
So the third one would be okay. So we talked about code base. We talked about the environments. Another one would be about delivery reality versus planning fiction, if we want to put it this way. So, again, we look at the roadmap, and what I would do if I were a CTO, I would trace we have an idea to we're deploying that idea. So, what does it take from bringing an idea, which is an abstract concept, to something that will be brought to life into the real world? And what does it take, and how does it take it to get there?
I'd like your help in transitioning us to a close. So, based on our conversation over the last 60 minutes or so, and given your background both on the service provider and on the client side, what give us a couple of takeaways, from this conversation that you want to share with listeners, with other CTOs. What should they take away from this, and how can they move forward?
So, if you want, regardless of whether you need a partner, by the way, because everything I'm going to say, everything I've said so far, I think is true, whether you do it internally or externally, by the way. So, but the problems that we mentioned earlier are compounded if it's external. If it's an external development, then it becomes even worse than if it were done internally, right? So the first thing first is make sure that product management and engineers are aligned. They must both be aligned on the requirement, what needs to be done, and the solution, how it will be done. The reason engineers need to understand the requirements is because if they don't understand the requirements, they will come up with a solution that does not meet the needs of the market, doesn't meet the needs of the business, and might not meet the needs of operations.
Hmm.
The reason product needs to understand the solution is because that solution needs to be adapted to the user experience, for instance, that they would expect. It needs to be adapted to the industry, but the cost of that solution, especially in production, needs to be uh, uh, based on their initial business case, for instance, right? So you don't bring a product into production that will lose money. So you need to make sure, especially uh, in the with the cloud, for instance, if your system is deployed into the cloud, it's very easy and very quick to spend more money than you would be aware of. So that has to be controlled.
Okay.
The second thing is, if you want a business case that you can believe in, you need good estimates. You need estimates that you can believe in. You need estimates that are reliable and predictable. So for that, you need to take into account the breadth of those requirements and the complexity of the solution, but also that gives you the size of the house, if you will. But to determine how long it's going to take to build that house, if I may say, you need to take into account the completeness of your artifacts, what defines the product in terms of requirements and solution. But you need also to take into account the maturity of your product, of your process, sorry. If your process is extremely complex or chaotic, it's going to take a lot more time than if you had a more of a lean, disciplined process. And then the last variable to take into account is the experience of your team. If the team is more or less experienced with the domain, with the technology stack, the architecture, or the existing code base, it will take more or less time. So that's where this estimation, has to be all encompassing, if you will, and must take all those variables into account.
Olivier, thank you very much for spending time with someone that you talk to all the time, but more so for the audience perspective and benefit. I really appreciate you spending time discussing these points about how to improve the software development lifecycle, whether you're outsourcing or just or insourcing. I really appreciate your time today. Now, as a part of this session, we're also going to be making available a software development lifecycle baseline checklist that we've created that will summarize a lot of what Olivier was saying today, and also a brief partner evaluation scorecard. And those links will be in the episode guide itself. And feel free to download it. And obviously, if you need any additional, help or guidance, feel free to reach out to myself or Olivier, and we'd be happy to help. But we thank you again for attending this session of Software Without Borders. And if you liked what you heard from Olivier, please subscribe and give us a 5-star rating. That would be fantastic. And thank you very much, Olivier. I really appreciate your attendance.
No, thank you very much for having me.